have a dream, oh, I have a dream. Red, white, and blue, fly free, fly free. I believe, oh, I believe. Will you dream with me?
Good morning. Welcome to Changing Times. It is Wednesday, September 13th, show number 126. I am Lynn Morris, and today we have our good friend Larry Ballard. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Lynn.
I tell you what, he's got another great show. Get your paper and pencil out. Make sure that you take some notes. This show, after it's live today, you can go back on Axe Media Group, Changing Times, catch our show 24 hours a day. Go back and watch it. Watch last week's show. Also, it's being live. I think this week our producer it says it's just now being live on Twitter. Is that what you said? Yep. Twitter. And so actually Daily Motion, Rumble, LinkedIn, Radio Free America, all kinds of places you can watch our show. So we appreciate everybody watching today. What Larry has to say is extremely important and can really, really affect your life. He's the author of Liberty Crusade. And it's a great book, and book number 2 is coming out, I believe, in October, and so we're extremely anxious. Larry, remember that you and I met, and I think Buddy Huggins met, and over at the vineyard in Ozark, and the owner of the business, I gave her one of your books, and since that time she's bought 8 or 10 books. Online through Amazon, and giving it to all her family and friends because she can't wait till the October book is coming out. So that's really great. Well, we're going to jump right into it. I think you're going to today, because you have so much content and what you're trying to say. I think we're going to go back and do a little bit of recap of what last week was. This week, thanks to our producer Matt, we've got a bigger slide presentation so you can see the slides. Somebody like me that's a little bit impaired vision, I was having trouble. I don't always look at things on my computer. I like to use my cell phone wherever I go, and so I was having trouble seeing the slides. So we fixed that today, so appreciate that. And so, Larry, let's go ahead and recap. All
right. Last week, we talked about the events of 9/11, and I asked people, why would you want to talk about something that was 23 years ago? Because most people don't understand why they did 9/11. 9/11 was effectively to be able to pass laws under the Patriot Act in order to basically enslave us so that they could set up under Bush's administration, so they could set up, oh, that's loud in my ear, so they could set up a illegal dictatorship. So I want to run through how they did that. So we had the event of 9/11. But always to understand what's happening today, we usually need to go back to the past. And so we're going to go all the way back to the rise of Hitler. And what happened is Hitler did something that was an exact parallel to what we saw on 9/11. He arranged to have the German parliament burnt down, blame it on a communist. That gave him the chancellorship and gave him the opportunity to take over control because they passed something called the Enabling Act. And what the Enabling Act did was effectively give him dictatorial powers for a period of 6 months. Well, guess what? That's exactly what 9/11 did for us. 9/11 happened. We hit the towers. It wasn't Washington, D.C., but it was our financial center. And it brought down the financial center of the United States of America. And it caused all kinds of trauma, enabling them to come in and pass the Patriot Act. And that name was chosen very carefully, because no matter what they put in it, they could say, well, if you don't agree with that, you're not a patriot. So they chose that name so that we would hush up and be quiet, and they could do whatever they wanted to do. So basically, that Patriot Act gave the government the same dictatorial powers that Hitler had had. It gave them the power. Well, for example, we would not have had January 6th had it not been for what they put in the Patriot Act. The events of January 6th saw Americans who peacefully protested. Trump said, go to the White House and peacefully protest. Keyword, peacefully. They were arrested. They're incarcerated to this day. They've never had a trial. That was able to be done because of what was put in the Patriot Act. And the Patriot Act also has something in it that's very heinous. And it's not going to happen, folks, but I need to tell you what it was. It basically allows the government to literally take your money. It can take your gold, your silver, it can take your IRA, your 401k, everything. And basically it can take over all of government. It's called continuity of government, where it gives the president the power in the event of a national emergency that he declares at his own on his own without conferring with Congress, to basically take over all forms of government, local, state, federal, tribal, all forms of production, and take away your money. Now, people say, oh, that's impossible. No, let's go back in history. We have a parallel event. 1933, we declared bankruptcy, and what did the government do? They did the same thing. They came in and said, you will turn over all your gold and all your silver upon penalty of a $10,000 fine or 10 years in prison, and the people turned their gold in, and the next thing you knew, as soon as they got it, they doubled the price of gold. And then we've got another example from history. Go back about 15 years, go to Greece, and Greece did something that we would call today a bail-in, where they said, oh, do you know, our banks are in trouble, so what we're going to do is we're just going to take your money, citizens, and use your money to bail us out. And so now we have the Frank Dodd bill that says, oh, we're going to do that exact same thing. So they're setting us up for a legal dictatorship. But that's not going to happen. So that takes us to where we are today.
Very good. Very good.
So basically, we can go on. So I want to read this. Why I changed this slide presentation a little bit on you, because over the last week, I was getting bombarded by people that say, oh, it's getting worse. It's getting worse. It's getting worse. What's happening? None of the prophets are right. Everything's going to hell in a handbasket. And I said, maybe I need to do a show that clarifies for people what's going on. We're in the middle of a psych operation. So both the white hats and the black hats are using misinformation and misdirection. And most people aren't spending full time watching this like I am. So they're not seeing the things that I see. So what I'm going to endeavor to do is to show you the nuances. They always give us a tip as to what they're doing and bring some clarity and hopefully some peace of mind to the people out there who are saying, I'm about ready to give up. So we changed the name of this. It's now part 1, Restoring the Republic, but it's basically a continuation of last week's show. So I'm moving on.
Yeah, let's get started. This is going to be interesting.
All right, so here's what this is all about. If Trump had it all, which he says he has, why didn't he come in after the election immediately and arrest Biden if, in fact, the election was stolen and take over? Because we've in the middle of something called the Stockholm Syndrome, where for the last 30 or 40 years, we've been brainwashed by the media and by their politicians. And we've had all those riots that happened a few years ago. And if we had had a forced turnover of the government, we'd have had civil war. So the reason, folks, that this is drug out and you think nothing's happening is because it's intentionally planned to little by little by little drip the truth out, so that when they do make the change and we do get continuity of government, that we won't have riots. So this is actually happening for the benefit of the American people. Moving on. So what we're seeing effectively is a movie that's scripted to open our eyes. The Truth Will Set You Free is the basis of this book and the basis of my second book. So I'm going to tell you what they're doing to open our eyes.
Yes.
So Trump says, we know where every vote went. Now, people might say, that's impossible. But wait a minute, let's think a second. You've got the news stations that are broadcasting election results every night, live? And they know minute by minute what votes have come in, and they know they can call the election early in each state. Well, you think Trump didn't have that ability? He knew in 2016 the election was stolen, and so he made provision for the military to be tracking every single vote as it went out. They knew where it went. They knew the number of votes that were on the outbound side, the number of votes that were on the inbound side. So as he said, we have it all. They have it all. So what happened? They didn't disclose that, but they've done some things that were interesting. Now, look at that picture of him frowning. Basically, people say, oh my God, Trump is such a buffoon. He does such stupid things. He says things. He has no governor on his mouth. No, Trump has a role. He's working with the military, and he has a role. Trump's job is to tear down the corrupt system so we can restore the republic and get back our freedom. So what was the first thing he said? Oh, the fake news, the fake news, the fake news. Here he is programming us with a new script now, because his assignment is to come in and be the what? The disruptor, so that he can cause that drip, drip, drip that tells us what's going on. All right, let's move on. So if you want to drip, drip, drip and wake the people up to the fact that the government is corrupt, how could you do that? Well, maybe what you do is you put a buffoon in the White House and you let him do all kinds of crazy things, and you let him do things that the people can eventually see. That's hurting us. That's hurting our economy. That's hurting the way the world looks at us, so that you what? Drip, 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 and wake up, wake up, wake up. So that's the role of the impersonator, Biden. And I didn't use that word by accident. So I want you to look at this and think, guys. You got a young Biden, you got an old Biden, ostensibly. But look at the ears. One's ears are attached, the other are detached. And then we've got pictures over to the left-hand side of a real actor and a fake actor, saying that we have A, actors in the White House, and B, the ability to use CGI so that we can't tell what's real and what's not real. So here's the question. What are the implications of a White House being occupied by an imposter? So basically, what is happening is now we're going all the way back to 1871 to see, did the government of the United States at that time make provision should the government ever be taken over by a hostile force? So let's go on. And guess what? There was a provision, because most people don't know that when America was founded, the principal thing that they were afraid of was government getting too much power. And so they gave us a clause that said we, the people, could come back in and take the government over if necessary. But the White House wasn't in Washington, D.C. It was in New York. We didn't even have a White House initially. But who was the real power? The military. And the first real constitution we had was under the military until we wrote the regular constitution that we now go by. So let's go back to that. That says the law of war manual would supersede the Constitution, and military law would go into effect under the commander-in-chief of the military. So laws passed, this is important, folks. If we think we've got a hostile entity like the global elite controlling our government, then the law of war manual says the Constitution as we know it is set aside, and we go to the original Constitution under the military. And guess what happens? The president is not in control. The commander-in-chief is in control. So, folks, I contend that hopefully by the time you get done with this show and the next one, you'll understand Biden was placed there as a buffoon to wake us up. Trump has been in control, puppeting the strings, not as the president, but as the commander-in-chief under what is now our Constitution, the law of war manual. So the military is what is controlling things right now, not our regular Constitution. Let's move on. If my slide will go, hold on. All right, I got to go through this slide carefully. There's a lot on here, but what I want you to do first is look over to that yellow box on the left. The United States is a Crown Vatican Swiss corporation. What that means is that we are not the government of the people, by the people, for the people. We are controlled by those three entities and have been for a long time. So listen, these words are very careful. Our original Constitution read, the Constitution for the United States of government, of the United States. That meant it was for we the people. They changed it in 1871, and it was altered, and the altered version reads, the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, that may not sound like much, but one gives us legal rights, and the other is just a statement. So basically what happened is in 1871, Congress, I'm going to read this, passed the Act of 1871, The act, I want you to see the act of the 41st Congress, Section 34, Section 3, Chapter 61 and 62. On this date, Congress passed an act titled Act to Provide a Government for the District of Columbia. The Act of 1871 is meant that Congress is under constitutional authority to do they did that without constitutional authority. So they created a separate 10-mile area called the District of Columbia that is not technically a part of the United States of America. This was an act of treason because by our Constitution, they were not empowered to do that. Note, this separate government status is in force for the District of Columbia, the Vatican, and the City of London. So the power of the world is in 3 places, none of which are a part of the nation they reside in. So the City of London is a separate area, just like the District of Columbia. And so basically we have 3 power blocks in the world that are controlling us, that constitute effectively the shadow government of the global elite. So the Act of 1871 suppressed the U.S. Constitution and created a new Constitution. And what was that new Constitution? It was a corporate constitution. And that is very significant, folks. So let's move on. And I'm going to show you the difference between being a republic and being a democracy, being a republic constitution and being a corporate constitution. So basically, what is a republic? It is a government of the people, by the people, for the people, based on a constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Now, what is a corporation? Listen up. This is important. A legal entity that is separate and distinct from its owners. Well, wait a minute. Are we the owners? No, the corporate executives of the corporation are the owners. Its sole obligation is to the financial interest of the shareholders. So that means you don't have any rights. You don't own a house. The government gave themselves take rights. You don't own anything. They can take your gold and silver, as we said at the beginning of this. So based on the Act of 1871, basically, we are not an independent nation. We are not under our original Constitution. We are a corporate charter, and every law that has been put on the books since then was for the benefit of the corporation, solely to provide the financial interest of the corporation. So let's move on.
Hey, Larry, we're going to, I think it's a good time. We'll just take a break, just pause just for a second. We're going to talk about 3 sponsors and we'll be right back. So just kind of know where you're going to be at. So Brad Pistow is our first sponsor, certified fiduciary financial planner right in Ozark, Missouri. And his telephone number is 417-581-9222, 417-581-9222. And I was just there at a meeting last night. There was a sold out crowd. I mean, it was free, but you had to sign up to get to it. So Brad Pistow had Ed Slott, who is recognized as the #1 retirement person in the United States. So, I mean, he's the expert that was the mentor and still mentor to Brad Pistow. So if you want to know anything about retirement planning, I use him. Several of our family members use him. Don Blackard uses him and the family, and a lot of people do. He's licensed in several states, and he has associates all over the country. And so really, it's never too early to think about retiring. And so he's got books, just like you, Larry. He's got a book called Safe Money Matters. He's got a book called Bulletproof. He's working on another book. I mean, this guy knows retirement planning. So I highly recommend Brad Pistow. Second, sponsor, we just had John Whittaker here 2 weeks ago, and he just bought out John Youngblood. So instead of Youngblood Motor Group, it's now called Springfield Nissan or Springfield Kia. And so same owner and same location. And I tell you what, I bought my last 2 cars from these guys, and I'll be buying my next car from them. Impeccable service after you buy the car, and they sell new cars and used cars. Most of their used cars are cars that have a warranty and are been inspected and things like this. So really great cars to buy. So I highly recommend them. They're on 3838 South Campbell and new cars on one side, just cross street, used cars, and in Springfield, Missouri. Over 44 years in business, long time family owned business. Third sponsor, Louis Michael. Louis Michael is a sub co-host at times, and he is also a sponsor. And he's a realtor at the firm down in Ozark, Missouri. And his telephone number, because he will always return his call, is 417 988 1086. 417 988 1086. He'll always return the call, and he specializes in all types of real estate, not only in Southwest Missouri where he resides, but he also has made transactions in Nashville this year, Vegas this year, and things like that. He's in the top 300 sellers of real estate, realtors in Missouri. So he's a tremendous guy, knows his business, but even more important, he has a nonprofit called Choosing to Live. He's one of those fellows, just like so many people out there that have despair and depression, anxiety, all kinds of things going on. And he almost committed suicide. He came so close to committing suicide, gun to his head. And God spoke to him and said, throw the gun down, Louis. He throws the gun down. And now he spends his life going around to schools, businesses, individuals, trying to help them choose to live. Don't take your life. And so just a tremendous guy. And so that's our three sponsors. We're going to have some exciting news because we're working on two more sponsors this fall. I think we're going to have a full slate of 5 sponsors here pretty quick. So God is good. So we're going to go back and now start what you're talking about. I think this is absolutely fascinating.
So before I go to this next slide, I want to recoup, how did we get the Act of 1871? It was effectively because they take us into wars. We were just coming out of a war. They bankrupt us. And then once they do that, they're able to come in and take over the government. So now I'm going to go to another similar event, and that takes us to 1933, to the Great Depression. So in the heart of the Great Depression, which started in 1929, we had a second bankruptcy. Think of it as, well, how do you have a second bankruptcy? Think of it as you went bankrupt, and all they're doing basically is putting new terms and conditions on a default that has occurred. So basically what happened in 1933 that relates to our current slavery system. In 1933, the U.S. had a bankruptcy, and the government ceased being a republic. And a republic is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Our Constitution refers to us not as a democracy, but a republic. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it is based. So that's where we lost our republic, and we became a democracy. So we were under a democracy, which is a government, according to Benjamin Franklin, where it is based upon the people least willing and least able to work finding out that they can get money from the national treasury. And once that happens, we basically take more and more and more and become a socialist nation, and we eventually go into bankruptcy. Well, that goes hand in hand with the corporate charter. So basically, we are not a republic. We are a democracy, and we are under a corporate charter, which says that literally every law that's passed is not for our benefit, but for the benefit of the corporation. And here I want to make a very important distinction. There are a lot of people out there that are talking about how are we going to get our government back? And they're talking about, oh, we go back to the law of the sea. We go back to the way it used to be done 300 years ago. No, all we've got to do is get out from under the corporate charter. And what we'll find is that for the last 100 years, once all this information comes out, we've had presidents in office that were put there but under the corporation. And so it's going to give us an opportunity to take the corporate charter, throw it out the window, go back to our original Constitution, take all those laws that were forced on us in order to drive us into slavery, wipe the slate clean, and go back to the founding principles of the United States of America. And it will be done in more or less one fell swoop, folks. So that takes us to the next slide, if my computer will function. And just a real quick recap, when I said we haven't had a fair election in 100 years, it started with McKinley. McKinley was for big business. His opponent, Bryan, was against. And so the three wealthiest men in the nation got together, put their money behind it, and said, we're going to get McKinley elected. And bam, they did. And they had epiphany. If we can get McKinley elected, we can get Wilson elected, who gave us the Federal Reserve, and anybody else we want. And so with the exception of three men, we've had basically every president that's been in office for 100 years put in under the corporation as their, let's call them CEOs, as opposed to the president of the people, by the people, for the people. So we haven't had a legitimate government for over 100 years.
So, Larry, those three men are Kennedy, Reagan, and Trump?
Correct.
That they weren't bought out, they weren't paid for, and so they weren't part of this plan.
Correct. So now let's move on. So what, restoring the republic, how do we do it? Well, things have to change in a very big way. And like always, we go back to a foreshadow in the Bible and in history that says, how could we change it? So folks, all we have to know is how they've enslaved us. And it's just so simple. If they enslaved us by doing these things, freedom is at the other end of the continuum. Just do the opposite of what they've done to enslave us, and we'll get freedom. So basically, we've had one control mechanism, the global financial elite that control us and virtually every nation in the world. So what might a new system look like? Oh, it might look like the American economic system that we had in place after the Civil War. And basically, it will even have more because it will look like something called Nasara. So let's go in and dive into that and see what that looks like.
Okay.
Multiple nations will share these four things. These are the key to wealth, security, prosperity, and government of the people, by the people, for the people. You got to control natural resources, control manufacturing, control trade, convert that into money. So when the bad guys do that, what do? They go out and buy power and influence into every sphere of influence, and they control us. So what the new system is going to do is say, we're not going to have a central control mechanism. That is going to be controlled by a multitude of nations so that no one nation can control the world. So that leads us to something that's happening that is very important, that has people very confused. Basically, China has got to fall. America's economic system has got to fall. My Bible says that the kingdoms of man will fall, and we'll get a new economic system, a completely new economic system, foreshadowed by the American economic system and Nasara, which was implemented basically in its infancy when they assassinated President Kennedy. So under that, we're going to release all of our shelf patents. We're going to share R&D and technology with multiple nations. So I want you to think about this. Right now, you got Taiwan that makes their computer chips. If they were to attack Taiwan, 90% of our computer chips would be gone. And what would they do? You can't make anything electronics without those chips. The whole supply chain would be down. So we're vulnerable because of the single source of control that we have. So we're going to create a new system that says we're going to have resources stored on every continent. We're going to have shared R&D. We're going to build the infrastructure out for nations. All nations are going to have an opportunity to participate in the wealth, the freedom, and the prosperity of the world. So let's move on. So I want you to look at this. Oh my God, people are saying, what the heck are they doing? They're bringing lawsuits against one Donald J. Trump, and look at Hillary with her 34,000 emails, and look at what Biden and his son have done, and et cetera, and there's no charges against them. This is all planned. Trump could not get his message out. The Supreme Court wouldn't do it. The court system wouldn't do it. Why? Because they've all been either blackmailed or taken over. But here was the plan unfolding right before your eyes, folks. The lawsuit in Georgia is very important because what is it alleging? That Trump basically was guilty of election fraud. Well, finally, now, what happens when they bring that lawsuit? He gets an opportunity to subpoena people. He gets an opportunity to bring the truth out, the truth that he says he's had from the beginning. And we see, I think, finally, that, oh, guess what? The people who stole that election get exposed, and the people's eyes pop wide open, and we understand what's been done to us. That sets the stage for them to bring back our original Constitution without having civil war. And then what's the significance of the other key suit that they're bringing against Trump? That's got to do with January the 6th. And basically, that's going to allow some disclosures to come out that are very important. And we're going to understand how it is that those American citizens have been stripped of their citizenship, put in a prison, never had a trial, never had a lawyer. And we're going to find out the truth. I think they've given us some hints. Nancy Pelosi's computer was ostensibly taken. And remember now, the District of Columbia is a 10 square mile area, and Trump has no authority to put U.S. troops there. Nancy does. Trump asked to have troops stationed in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. She refused. So there are pointers pointing not to Trump, but pointing to the Democrats and Nancy Pelosi. I believe all of that is going to come out, give clarity, and set the stage so that we can begin the process to end the movie, to show all of everything that's happened, and get our government back. My computer is just not cooperating. Come on, go to the next slide. All right. So now, this one is simple, folks. This shows you the absurdity of what's going on. I've got a picture over there of a Trump rally. Thousands and thousands of people. I've got a picture of a Biden rally with nice little circles and 6 foot apart and maybe a dozen people. Now let's put our thinking caps on. A man who can rally tens of thousands of people versus a man who can rally less than 2 dozen. Which one do you think is going to get the popular vote and going to be elected? My vote's on the one that can bring in thousands and thousands of people. So that man, let's look at what his agenda is versus what the agenda of the man who gets 2 dozen people is. So basically, Trump comes in, he says, Obama says, what are you going to do? Wave a magic wand and change everything? And Trump says, yep, because he knows the magic formula. It's a formula. You control natural resources, control manufacturing, control trade, and basically you get control of the money. So what did he do? He came in and gave us back our oil and our steel. He came back in and took regulations out that allowed us to build our infrastructure and to build factories. He came in and put tariffs against China, which incidentally is the very thing we did back in following the Civil War, or actually before then. We put huge tariffs on England so that England commodities were too expensive, and that forced the American people to develop what? The Industrial Revolution. And so Trump positioned all of that so that what would happen? Our stock market would go from 10,000 to 30,000 overnight. So what does Biden do when he comes in? The other end of the continuum, the exact opposite, to show us the absurdity of what the globalists are doing to us. So he took back control over natural resources. He made us dependent on oil. We're begging Saudi Arabia and other nations, oh, give us some oil. And he stifled our manufacturing, and he obstructed the supply chain. So we had shortages everywhere. There are ships sitting out in the ocean that should be unloaded, and they're not. There's ships being stuck in a canal. They're longshoremen that won't unload or can't unload ships. And so basically, he's putting the pain on, the exact opposite of what Trump did. And then what do? We've talked in other shows. Basically, you collapse the economy. When you lower the interest rates, you get people to come in and invest. And then once they've put their money in, you raise the interest rates, and then you freeze credit, and the collapse happens. That's how the banking system is collapsing. So basically, he now inflates the money supply. He freezes the credit. He raises the interest rate. And bam, we're moving into the exact opposite situation. Instead of our stock market's going from 10,000 to 30,000, everything is imploding, and we're having a real crisis. So which policies do you think the American people would rather have? The one that gives them prosperity, or the one that drives us into a situation where they can't even buy? They have to make a choice at the end of the month. Am I going to buy my medicine, or am I going to buy my food? That's where America's at. That's the wake-up point, folks, when they can control what we can do, what we can have, what we can buy, whether we are financially independent. That's when the people's eyes are opening. We're there now, folks. We're at the point where pain is being inflicted upon us. So now, here's the other key thing that's happened under Biden versus Trump that should be a wake-up call for you guys. He had to fight like the Dickens to get that wall built. Well, guess what? China had a wall. And guess what? Israel is now saying we're going to put a wall around our whole frickin' country because we're not going to allow the people from Africa to come in, and we're not going to lose our national identity. But under Biden, we don't get a wall. We get an open border, and we get an army of people coming in to create chaos. So again, open your eyes. Which would you rather have? Would you rather have make America safe under Trump, or would you rather have let's create absolute chaos under Biden? The choice is very simple, folks. They're opening our eyes little by little, drip by drip, drop by drop, truth by truth. Let's move on. So what happens? Once we have that financial collapse, which we're prepared for now, because the Fed has entered in, which is what they do every time they cause an economic collapse, they've raised the interest rates over and over and over again. Now we have BRICS, and BRICS is something that we'll talk about on the next show, which is one of the things that's most confusing people. People look at BRICS, and BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and they say, well, they're trying to collapse the US dollar. Remember, I said earlier that America had to collapse. Both economic systems, capitalism and communism, must collapse. So I'm going to give you a teaser here. We think BRICS is our enemy. Actually, BRICS is helping us restore our republic because first the system has to collapse before the old constitution, the charter, can be taken out and we can go back to our original constitution. So once they collapse that system, which I believe is fairly imminent, which is sort of why I'm doing this set of presentations, then we have the opportunity for the whistleblowers to come out. Trump said right after the election, we have it all. And I just said a minute ago, yeah, he does, because if the media can give you the reports instantaneously, you bet your bippy with the sophistication of the military behind Trump, he knew where every vote was. He's got it. He's just been waiting to deliver it. And so once we have the financial collapse and the people really feel the pain, then the whistleblowers are going to come out and everything is going to be exposed and the people are going to stand up. And I want you to think, they give us pointers if we're watching. What happened to Zuckerberg, Facebook? Well, we got a little bit of an idea of what he was doing to us, and the stock plummeted by 50%. What happened to CNN? What's happening to Disney? So when we get the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, an atomic bomb of truth, something is going to happen that's never happened before. Every other collapse has been, well, they collapse the system. We are forced to bail them out. They then buy back everything for 10 cents on the dollar. They become stronger and we become more indebted. That's not what's going to happen this time, folks. Because of that truth bomb, whole governments are going to collapse. Let's look at some more pointers they've given us. The Prime Minister of England stepped down. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia stepped down or was taken out. The Emperor of Japan stepped down. Hundreds of corporate CEOs have stepped down during this period of time. All of that was because Trump was going around, him and Ben Solomon, and basically putting leverage on corporations. That was Solomon's job, and leverage on government, saying, we got it all. You will capitulate or else. And one by one, we're going to go into this in detail in the next presentation. Trump went on a world tour and he dropped stacks of information on the desk of political leaders and said, we've got it. You are now our puppet. We're not your puppet. You're our puppet. You're going to do what we want you to do. So we're just about to wrap up on this, and then I'm going to go give you some teasers as to what's in next week. So this is basically a summary that I do with most of these shows, because I want people at the end to really get it, to see, whoa, they did all this to us. So here we go. These are the ways that they utterly, completely, and absolutely control us and take our freedom away. They control the basis of all wealth. These four things that I'm going to touch determine the nation or nations that will be global superpowers. If you can't do these four things, you're just a has-been. You're not a global superpower. You have to control the natural resources of the world, or a good portion of them. America is rich in natural resources. You have to control manufacturing. Who are the two dominant forces in manufacturing? China and the United States. You have to control trade. Who controls trade? China and the United States. You have to convert that into money to buy power. Now it's currently being used to empower the bad guys. It's going to be used to empower the good guys. And then how do they take our money? We don't have control over the financial system. They have control. So they increase the money supply. This is all what they do. That's a formula to basically create boom bust cycle so that they take the money of the people. They increase the money supply. They lower the interest rates. That creates the hype. And then they pushes that in investment. So in 29, it was stocks. In 08, it was the real estate market. And then what do? Just what they're doing right now, folks. They increase the interest rates. So now the cost of money is no longer cheap, it's expensive. And then what do? They dry up the credit. And then once the credit's dried up and the interest rates have been dried up, what happens? Everything crashes. And they have now stolen your money that you worked so hard for. Maybe you've lost your home. Maybe you lost your 401k, whatever, but they take things from us. So we have the illusion of ownership, but we really don't. And let's give you an example. When we were formed, one of the principal things the founders wanted, we want the people to own property. So I want to give a caveat. I was a real estate agent for 12 years and a broker and owned my own small brokerage firm at one point in time. We were originally under something called AODIO ownership, which is the Spanish land grant process, where once you buy a property, pay for it, it's yours for perpetuity. The government has no take rights. Well, then as the global elite began to take us over, we changed to fee simple. And guess what? The government got take rights. So let me ask you a question. All of you out there who own a home, raise your hand symbolically. I got news for you. You don't own a home. And let me show you how unfair it is what they do to us. Basically, they create one of these crashes, which puts you in financial difficulty, and bam, they come in and they take your house. And when they do, they don't try to sell it for fair market value. They sell it for whatever the back taxes are. A $10,000 house that's worth $50,000 is taken for $10,000, and the owner gets nothing. All that money goes to the global elite. So we're just about out of time. So the next thing they do is they take that money and they control the 7 spheres of influence: the family, religion, education, media, entertainment, politics, and the economy. And here are examples that I want you to be looking for of how they enslave us. They use wars in order to bankrupt us, to put their central banking system in, to cause collapses, to utterly take us over. They have the fiat currency that they use to control us, that's constantly devalued and inflated. They have open borders to bring in an army of people to cause chaos in the nation. They inflict this with the drug epidemic. They go to great lengths to divide us so that they can cause that civil war. They have rigged elections, which we've talked about for the last 100 years. They have backed candidates on both sides. And we have, no matter who got in, it was not representing the people, it was representing the global elite. And then they control healthcare, they control food, water, they control jobs and housing. In other words, they control all the necessities of life. These are the control mechanisms that are inflicted on us now. That's under the corporate charter. But we're going to go back to our founding, simple, one-page Constitution. We're going to wipe out all those laws that were placed on the books to enslave us, and we're going to go back to our founding principles. And that means there's an entirely new form of government, folks. And I'm going to go back in the next show and tell you what our original government looked like and how it's going to be restored and the freedoms that it is going to give us. I think with that, we might be just about out of time.
I think that's exciting. I tell you what, so we did about a 3-hour show in less than 45 minutes. Thank you for listening today, and be sure and share this with your family and friends. They can go back and watch it, and it just will be really worth their time. So, hey, Larry, you're a difference maker, and Don Blackard says you're being the change. And thank you for giving people this information for them to think and ponder on. I think it's some pretty good information. Thank you. We'll be back next Wednesday.
That's what it